Namaste and welcome to the live. Thank you so much for joining today. And today our topic is yoga and injuries. And we're going to open up a discussion about injuries with yoga and how you can overcome them, where injuries come from, as well as how to instruct yoga if you have an injury. All right, so if you're just joining, my name is Amber Jean, and I have over 20,000 hours of instructing experience. And if you read about the 10,000 law, once you do anything for 10,000 hours, you're considered an expert. I've exceeded that, and I've done 20,000 through my trainings here in Cincinnati, as well as traveling internationally. I specialize in Rocket and Ashtanga yoga, and I studied directly with Larry Schultz for 11 years. And when you first start practicing, you might say, and people will say, yoga hurt me, I got injured. In the beginning of your yoga practice, usually what happens is the yoga practice will bring out any pre-existing conditions. So if you feel that yoga injured you when you first start because of your wrists or your ankles or your hips or your shoulders, the yoga is actually showing you your weaknesses. Okay? And when yoga brings out your weaknesses, you can feel like you're injured. But part of the process is strengthening your body. And so in that process, you will be going through different phases of aches and pains. And I remember when I first started practicing, especially my wrists, I was sitting on my couch. I was still living at home because I had started practicing when I was 18. And I was still living at home. And I remember sitting on the couch with an ice pack on one of my wrists. And my dad, he said, I can't believe what you're doing to yourself. Why are you doing this? Why is yoga doing this to you? And it was because I had started a very early Ashtanga practice. And the first thing that's going to happen when you start practicing is the points of contact between your body and the yoga mat. So the first thing that gets stronger, and the first place that you'll see people complaining about, is wrists and ankles. If your feet have been stuck in shoes most of your life and now you're barefoot on your yoga mat, you're going to think that those are the first two places that usually people will complain of injuries. The next thing is the shoulders and the neck, okay? And so if you start to just kind of trail up the body, shoulders, neck, if you go up from the ankles, knees, okay? And this is why getting trained properly is so important. Because the key to a good yoga instructor is preventing people from injury and teaching this stuff in a therapeutic manner. That's how yoga was always meant to be taught, is a therapeutic practice. And so it's really important as new teachers to be looking at hands and feet and making sure that beginners have their fingers spread, making sure that beginners are lifting their insteps in their ankles. And then the next biggie is the knees, And this is all goes back to rocket philosophy is we're practicing function over form, okay? And so if we're practicing function, it's okay to bend the knees. And this is a big difference between Ashtanga yoga and rocket, the way it was originally intended by Larry Schultz. And that's the way that I instruct rocket. Rocket and Ashtanga should not be taught the same way. There's two different philosophies. And proper Ashtanga, you're really working on getting into the pose with a proper breath count. If you study classical Ashtanga, there's amount of breaths that you need to be taking to achieve the proper vinyasa count. And what's a little different in rocket is we're taking more preparation breaths, okay? In rocket, we're inhaling to prepare, and then we're going to exhale into, for example, a Marichyasana. And in Ashtanga or in rocket, we're taking that time to prepare. In Ashtanga, we're going into things with those proper breaths. And so what happens is there's more room for injury because people aren't, you have to work up to being able to get into those poses with one breath. If you're not taking those preparation breaths, you're opening yourself up for more injury. And this is kind of a little bit where my medicine rocket practice goes is, if the shoulders could get injured or the shoulders can be very vulnerable in Ashtanga and rocket, which is the style that I focus on. And if the shoulders aren't properly warmed up, that could cause injury. And so, in a medicine rocket class, I might just have people seat it and then just start to have them start to work on that movement of that chaturanga, because you really need to activate your upper back. And this is where some of my more classical training came from, is from Indu, who was she used to be a Russian ballerina, okay? She was the one that could really come and you'd be afraid you're going to get hit if you don't do it right. And that's also part of the practice is learning to instruct proper alignment so people don't get injured without hammering people over and over and over again and making them feel bad about themselves. So when I first started yoga, I felt bad about myself because I was constantly getting corrected. Okay. And so if you're constantly getting overcorrected, you might feel like you're doing it all wrong. But now that I'm older, I can handle that criticism a lot better than when I was first starting. And so this is kind of the dance that we have to take is being able to, first and foremost, the main thing that yoga instructors need to teach is in a way that people don't get injured. And there's way, way, way too many egos, especially male egos in yoga. And there's too many people that think that that's what yoga is if I can touch my feet to my head in a bhujangasana, then I'm really getting good. Okay. You're going to be getting good when you practice regularly and you stick with it. Okay. That's pretty much what separates me from everybody else is when I met Larry and I started into this whole yoga thing, I really became dedicated and I never looked back. Okay. So and now that I'm older, I really have realized, okay, the topic today is yoga and injury. So a lot of the injuries that happen in yoga are things that are happening off your yoga mat. So depending on what kind of job you have and depending on what you're doing outside of yoga, that can also make you injured. And, I had to do an experiment on myself, when my studio closed and I had to really scramble to create online. That's why I have so much online content, because, I really had to shift a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. And in that time, I thought, well, you know what? I could get a second job. I'm a resourceful kind of gal. And I ended up serving. Okay. And I thought, you know what? I can do this. I've done yoga for 20 plus years. I can, easily work, a 6 hour shift and just be walking around and giving people food. And unfortunately, and fortunately, because now I can talk about it and I can promote more healthy things that need to be happening in the workplace, from my personal experience, is, that kind of work and being on your feet that long, it will tear up your back. Okay. And so my practice really has suffered over the past 4 years, not for myself of lack of practicing, but for trying to do something outside of yoga. And when you're a yoga instructor, and you're teaching, you have a chance to sit down and lay down, during the shavasanas. I remember Larry Schultz laying down during the shavasanas. So, and that's like when you're like, oh my gosh, I did it. I did it. And when you get really good at instructing, it's like you're teaching a dance. It's so fun. And that's why the bigger classes can be really, really fun, for me to teach. But when you're instructing that many people, you really need to have your verbal cues in a place where people aren't going to get injured, and, really, really looking a lot. So, in a lot of my yoga videos, that I was watching of myself teaching, I noticed, okay, so now we're talking about injuries from teaching too much yoga, instructing all the time. And, in those 20,000 hours, I was looking down. Okay. I was looking down and I was looking at the students and I was looking down. And then that caused a weakness in my upper back and my neck. So I really had to correct that. And the thing about injuries is injuries are the biggest teachers. And this goes back to rocket philosophy. The weaknesses become the strengths. The strengths become the weaknesses. So if you think you're really strong now, yeah, take a rocket class. It's good to have a sense of humor talking about these things because it is an intense practice. And, if you're, and this is also why, so we just said our weaknesses become our strengths, because injuries are your biggest teachers. All the stuff that I've had to go through from when I first started practicing with my wrist to having upper back and neck issues from literally looking down and working with people for 20,000 hours. Those things have taught me so much. because now I'm looking for these patterns in my students, and I also had to come up with lots of creative ways to strengthen these muscles that I was feeling were getting injured. And that's why I feel that my Emerson's Vinyasa program is a more comprehensive program than just rocket yoga. Because in Emerson's Vinyasa, we're looking at weaknesses. We're looking at where those injuries either have taken place or are about to take place. And we're gonna use the tools that we have with all the fitness industry, right? We're going to use those tools because there's ways, if you've ever had physical therapy, there's ways that you can strengthen these areas. And then when you strengthen them, you're going to come back to your yoga practice so much more healthy. And originally, when Larry Schultz designed the rocket, it was because too many people were getting injured in Ashtanga. And if Ashtanga yoga is taught correctly, then your Ashtanga practice should not injure you. And Ashtanga yoga has a bad rap right now because too many people are getting injured. Too many people are getting over adjusted. And then when I'm looking and seeing, some of these rocket trainings online, you don't want to be over adjusting, okay? If you want to do 2-finger adjustments in rocket trainings and rocket classes, you're mostly adjusting to prevent injury. And so the rocket was really meant to be a holistic approach, okay, to Ashtanga yoga. And I'm sure, I could be getting, kickback for some of these things that I'm saying. But honestly, these conversations we need to start having these conversations, and we need to have them because why? We want longevity in our practice, okay? And, I've been fortunate enough that, even if you're injured as a yoga instructor, you have to use your tools that you have in your tool bag. You can't say, well, how am I going to be able to teach if I have an injured wrist and I can't demo arm balances? Got to be creative. And, you got to be looking at students, and you got to be using your top tier students, the front row people. You look at them and you go, okay, and this is what Larry would do, and if you knew Larry Schultz, he practiced in the morning with us, and he had a very organic, natural, I would say it was never anything too crazy. It's like just having a solid practice, just being able to do an elbow stand with the legs straight. Okay. There was no need for funky pincha. That's all more modern takes on an ancient practice, in my opinion. And anyhow, and so, but then when Larry Schultz was teaching, and he taught really big classes. His biggest classes were at 4:30 and also at 6 p.m. And you never saw Larry Schultz demoing a handstand. You never saw Larry Schultz demoing this and demoing that. I was the little monkey. So I hope your guys are getting a sense as that, I do have a sense of humor. And after all this teaching I have to remember, you kind of want to have fun with it and not take yourself too seriously. And that's where I am now. But, I was Larry Schultz's little demo monkey. So I was up front, and he had me. Larry's was very smart. He had the 20-year-old demoing. Okay. And so, that was really when my practice was blowing up, so to speak, was in my 20s, early 30s. But what's crazy is in my 40s, I just keep getting stronger, and so I'm like, wow, there is a sense of strength that builds over time. And so, if you are teaching, instructing injured, you just want to be careful that, you don't want to focus on that. You just want to focus on keep the focus on the students. It's a great opportunity to get the focus off yourself and on your into directed on your students instead. And that's a good reminder, I think, for all of us, and on those days, that you're not feeling your best, then say less and keep the focus on the students. And that's really the true Rocket philosophy, is that you want to empower the inner teacher. Well, how are you going to empower the inner teacher if you're demoing everything and you're showing all the stuff you can do? Okay. Sometimes, okay. So sometimes I do demo and, demoing how to float up into a headstand, something that I know that I'm not going to get injured demoing, but something that's inspiring. Okay. And so yoga demos can be inspiring, but you just want to make sure that you don't get injured. And actually, this is the more advanced part of teacher training that you don't a lot of my teacher trainings, it's like this is the third, you take one rocket training, you get your 50 hours, you take the second, you get 100 hours. But then once you get 100 hours, you need to learn how to breathe and instruct at the same time. And that's really the big trade secret right there. So yeah, I mean, you can just, yeah, I give them out, and there's a way to do it, and you're actually teaching like with a pranayama. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, fold forward. Hear the breath. And, and that's a big mistake also that newer yoga teachers do, is that they say too much too fast. So it's important to slow down when you're teaching and make sure students are warmed up. And a lot of my teaching also is, I offer yoga privates. And my yoga privates often, which is really interesting at this phase of my teaching, is my yoga privates offer clients ways to rehabilitate. So I'm working with someone that just had a foot surgery and figuring out how the body moves. So, understanding that how the body moves without studying anatomy, this is a kind of a different kind of concept, I think, for yoga instructors. And, in my belief system, good yoga instructors never have to study anatomy ever, because you learn anatomy by living in your body. And you learn how the body works. And the more you teach, the more you see in the bodies. So you see how, You see how the shoulders are rotating and moving. And then you get an injury, and then you work with how you feel in that whole scapula. I mean, my scapula, whew, I had to really wake those muscles up. There's a lot that is going on in the scapula in the scapula period, and students aren't activating it. And if you're moving from your joints, just swinging the arms, up and down, and you're just moving, of course, your shoulders are going to get injured. Okay, you really need to learn how to activate. That could be our new little little something. Activate, like our superpower words. Activate. So anyhow, take a breath. Slow down. And remember that the body is actually always wanting to heal. And so is your mind. Your mind is also wanting to heal. And the mind can slowly become rewired to become a more peaceful brain, a brain that is not on a trauma response, a brain that acknowledges the past but lets it go. So those are some of the injuries is all it's all here and up in the head. And so, working on the mind medicine, right? And what's interesting is over time, I have slowly felt my brain healing and changing in a good direction. And when I was younger, I felt my brain changing in a negative direction. And that happens from a trauma response. And understanding my own responses is why I feel that I can do what I do and I can earnestly help other people, is because I've been through it. I mean, I've been through a lot. I've lived many, many different lives, okay? And that's why I always say is, you want to learn yoga from someone that has been through some stuff, okay? And, newer teachers, and I want to also promote newer teachers. You guys, when you're new, you've got fresh little brains. And when you're new, it's good just to remain the facilitator and not overthink your classes. And I think, newer teachers, they get so wrapped up in saying, I need to sit down and I need to work on what I'm going to teach. What's nice about the Emerson's Vinyasa system is you have routines. So you have routines. So you once you memorize those routines, you don't need to keep taking all this extra time to prepare. Instead, you need to take time when you're actually teaching. And this is why I'm a big promoter of women in yoga, because we're more intuitive. We're not just going to push people into yoga poses that aren't ready. Women in yoga are amazing because they have this gift. We have a gift. We have a gift of being sensitive. We have a gift of being vulnerable. We have a gift of becoming mothers and grandmothers. And when you have that gift, it makes you so much more in tune with what's going on in the yoga setting. And it is really important to get off of this planning the class and looking at someone's body and saying, oh my gosh, this person has hyperextended knees. I can't tell them that right now because if I do, they're really going to be embarrassed and called out. Okay, I have to be creative with having them strengthen their quadriceps, lifting their toes, slightly micro bending the knee, and finding these creative ways and not just say your knees are messed up. So really, what we're doing as yoga instructors is we are always, you know, um, working through different layers of injuries. But what happens is the more that you teach, the more you learn from them. Okay. So thank you so much for joining the live today. If you missed it, go back to the beginning. We talked about yoga and injuries today. And I offer an on-demand bottle rocket training with over 100 hours of content. I do a lot of teacher training lectures in that program, as well as it has over 25 at least different yoga classes that you can take at home, all focused on bottle rocket, classical rocket 1, classical rocket 2, cross training classes, and some of the Emerson's vinyasa, which is a nice blending of them all. Okay. So I just want to thank you all for joining. Once again, go back to the beginning, and I will see you hopefully on your mat or visit your countries, or maybe you'll come and visit me here in Cincinnati. All right. You know what we say, be inspired. Namaste.